Marshall was a sea dog, a Newfoundland dog named after the ship that his owner sailed on. The W.F.Marshall left Hampton Roads, Virginia, on March 7, 1877. It had been a long voyage, and they were finally heading home to Canada. But the very next night the ship was in pounding surf and fog, sailing into trouble. Marshall stood on deck that night, sniffing the salty air for danger, as Captain Wright plotted a course to the northeast that he hoped would take them through the storm. The crew trimmed the sails, and Marshall padded across the rolling deck on unsteady paws.
A long time ago, before there were trucks transporting goods across the country, there were ships taking goods up and down the coast of America, and the captains of these ships knew that Nantucket, an island surrounded by deadly shoals, was a place to avoid.
At midnight, Captain Wright looked at his charts again and figured he was 50 miles south of the island. But a thick gray fog now wrapped itself around the ship, hiding its exact location.
We could make no land, and until hailed by the patrolman, considered we were upon some shoal inside the lightship. Captain James H. Wright, 1877.
Well, Nantucket's first life-saving station was built at Surfside, right on the Surfside beach, in 1874, and it was manned by a keeper and a crew of 6. Keeper Joseph Winslow, an unemployed whaling captain, and he picked his own crew. His number 2 man that he picked was another unemployed whaler, and then the rest of the crew, the other 5 men, were Nantucketers that certainly knew the waters of this island. In those early years, they manned the station from about the 1st of December through until the beginning of summer, the following May. The keeper and his wife would live there year-round, but the crew would only be there for those months. Those were the months when we were going to have the shipwrecks.
That same foggy night, surfmen Horace Cash and Charles Glidden had left the Surfside Life-Saving Station on beach patrol. With the dim light of an oil lantern, they trudged for hours against a fierce wind, until the end of their patrol. They saw nothing. Then, as the early morning light rose and the sky lightened, Surfman Cash thought he saw a ship through the shifting fog. He listened for voices or the sound of water lapping against a hull, but only the wind called to him. Did his eyes trick him? He waited, watching the sea, and then he saw a terrible sight. It was the W.F.Marshall. She had run aground close to the beach. The crew was scrambling to take in sails. The mast and rigging groaned and strained. The sea broke on deck, threatening to wash the men overboard. Horace Cash began to run down the beach. 15 people, a baby, and a dog had to be taken to dry land before the ship broke apart. Cash could tell by the way the waves were pounding the ship that they didn't have much time. He ran the 2 miles back to the station and called out to the keeper.
And when a ship wrecked on the backside of the surf line fairly near shore, the surfmen had many tools, not least of which was a small cannon that would fire a line out over the ship, and once out to the victims, they would in turn pull lines out and connect themselves to the shore, and then attach that line to a life ring, as you see here, with a pair of pants in it. This is called a breeches buoy. And that breeches buoy would then be used to, one by one, bring these men ashore quickly.
Mrs. Jones was the first to be rescued. Marshall watched her climb high above the deck. A sharp wind slapped her face, and she trembled getting into the breeches buoy. She grabbed the line just before she was yanked into the air. She swung over the waves and landed on the beach. The steward went next, The wind and rain made each rescue slow and strenuous. The mate climbed into the breeches buoy, holding his enormous dog tightly in his arms as they were pulled to shore. Marshall's thick coat was wet with seawater. On the beach, he shook himself dry, soaking the people around him. The mate huddled with Marshall until everyone was off the ship. An islander named George Gardner came down the beach to help. He told the stranded sailors they were welcome at his home for a warm meal and dry clothes.
In the 1800s, everyone on Nantucket had something to do with the sea, and when a ship would wreck along the shores of this island, the people understood what the passengers and crew of that ship were going through, and as a consequence, the islanders developed a reputation for being very welcoming to anyone unfortunate enough to lose their ship in the shoals around Nantucket.
Before nightfall, several of the shipwrecked sailors arrived at the Gardner home. The kitchen was crowded with hungry men. The mate brought Marshall to the house, and the Gardner daughters fell in love with him. The big dog nudged his head against Alice's leg, and Edith brought him a big bowl of food. By morning, the girls were so in love with Marshall, they just could not bear to see him go. They pleaded with the mate to leave his shaggy beast behind. The sailor realized that another captain might not allow a dog on board. So with great reluctance, he agreed to leave Marshall with the Gardners. The girls hugged the big dog and waved goodbye to the survivors. Marshall loved his new home. He may have been a sea dog, but he was good at claiming the Gardners' fireplace rug at night. Alice and Edith trained him to walk to school with them. And in the evening, when George called out, "Marshall, go meet the girls," the dog raced back to the schoolhouse. He took the handle of Alice's lunch pail in his teeth and trotted home to deliver it to her mother. Marshall became an island mascot. Nantucketers found him at the lifesaving station, on the wharf, in town, or anywhere he could find some leftover food and someone to pet him. Who could resist such a lovable beast? He had survived a shipwreck and won the hearts of an entire island.